Hello, my name's Jeffro. I'm from Loughran, and then we've got Alex and Andy on the screens next to me. Welcome to this nice little webinar. I fortunately don't have to do a lot of talking today. I've just been tasked with doing the intro to say hello, welcome you, and then I get to hand over to these two professionals. So thanks for being here. We're going to chat a little bit about 0% low nose today and get a little bit of information, a little bit of chat. Yeah, hopefully learn a little bit. I quite like your guys' enthusiasm and getting a little bit ahead of the game, because you're probably thoroughly brewing standard beers, selling lots of standard beers while people get boozed up for Christmas, but you're planning ahead for January to brew now and sell in Jan for your 0%. That said, you're probably brewing, like, realistically, low nose and whatnot are like the fastest growing, like they're one of the biggest sectors for everyone now in terms of growth. They are not just for January, for all year. So like most people, a lot of people have them in core ranges now. There was an article in the BBPA recently that June and July is actually the biggest that was last year, were the biggest months for low nose. So it is an all year drink. I mean, I drink them all the time, but you know, January is when we kind of think of it as being dry Jan, etc. So it's the time when we like kick on for, and everyone does. So it's a good time to like get your head around it and have a little think about it. So good time for us to do this and you guys to crack on, and really good. Yeah, we're all aware of some of the kind of challenges. They're a little bit tricky and often not what we like initially get into to start with. So it's good to learn the tips and tricks, and sometimes it's new ingredients, sometimes it's new ideas, and just tweaking the way our brains think a little bit. So Alex and Andy are like really great resources for that, and the new products and new ideas and whatnot. So this is going to be helpful, but it's also kind of worth saying that the guys at Loughran and myself and Alex and Andy are always around as well. So after this, if ever you've got any more questions, I mean, we're going to have a Q&A after this as well. So there's a little, I was going to say, in the right hand side of the screen here, there's a couple of buttons that are confusingly chat and then Q&A. You can write in the chat if you want, or that might be distracting, and that comes up all the time. But there's also a Q&A button, and I think that saves your Q&A questions, so at the end we can answer them all in one go. So if you have any questions, we'll go through them. That's first of all. But then after that, in general, if you ever want to give me a ring, I look after the south of England, but we also have other Loughran reps. We can answer questions, and then Alex and Andy can answer questions kind of indefinitely. So we're always around to kind of generally answer chat, and then we've got the Q&A as well. And then also the Loughran website has loads of resources as well. Like we try and keep updated about what you're doing, like as well as ingredients and how to use them and whatnot. And I think that is all the things I'm supposed to talk about in my brief, to be friendly and introduce these two people. Is there anything else you want me to say before you crack on and do your slides?
No, let's mention the link to your website with the low alcohol section.
Click here for products and docs.
Oh my God, you watch YouTube all the time. Like and subscribe. Yeah, there's some links down below to like the things that we might talk about today, where you can pick them up as well, because we're going to talk about yeast, we're going to talk about ISY and whatnot. So all these things are really helpful. But I'm actually going to get put down into I'm going to like disappear in a little bubble, and then these guys are going to crack on. Yeah, enjoy, and I'll be in the Q&A as well. So
perfect. Thanks, Jethro.
Get rid of me now.
I'm gonna find the button that I need to share.
Okay.
The way this is going to work, I'm going to share some slides. I'm going to read through the slides, chat about low alcohol beer making, and then Alex will jump in at points if she fancies, and we'll also handle the Q&A at the end as well. So slides, let's press the button, see what happens. Hopefully it works, huh? I'm not getting in there.
It's not looking promising at the moment.
Let's press the button again. Okay.
Ah, there we go.
There we go. Didn't work first time. Don't know what happened. Right. So the aim of today really is to give you a holistic overview of the low alcohol beer making process, and to try and get you to think about it as though you were making something other than an ordinary beer. because in many respects you're almost making a soft drink. It's quite different to your regular brewing process, and you have to consider all the parts. So a holistic overview of the process. Before I do go into it, I'll probably introduce myself very quickly. So my name is Andy. I work for Lallemand. I cover the UK and Scandinavia, and as part of my remit, I've been handed the Low Alcohol Beer Championship. I'm not really sure what that means, but it means I get to be involved in all sorts of low alcohol beer discussions, and I've helped write and research a lot of the resources that we have on the Lallemand website, some of which we'll go through today. Alex, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, I'm Alex. I cover the UK and Ireland technical sales manager alongside Andy, attending beer festivals and visiting breweries and advising on plenty of recipes, and people who've already released or done a first pass at a recipe as well, just like tweaks and having a look at improving those recipes to get exactly what they want for the finished low alcohol beer. So I'm always happy to help and chat about low alcohol.
Great, thanks. So, well, I guess that's what that slide was for, huh? So that's
yeah,
good.
I was going to say, we have a slide.
We've covered that. These are also our contact details. That's the only part I didn't mention. So if you need our email addresses, they're right there. Take
they are also on the website.
So before we go into how we make these beers, let's try and define them first. So alcohol-free, if you're labeling alcohol-free in the UK, less than 0.05% alcohol. If you're exporting it to Europe, actually it has to be less than 0.5% alcohol. And in many jurisdictions around the world, less than 0.5% is what you'd use for labeling alcohol-free. It's not the same everywhere. There's certain countries it's much higher. So I think in Mexico, it's like 2% or something. And then there's other places it's even higher. But for the purpose of this talk, what we're going to be talking about mostly is low alcohol beer, which is less than 1.2% ABV for tax reasons, but you're probably going to be trying to make it less than 0.5% alcohol. When you're doing that, you do also have to consider that you need to label the nutritional information on the can as well. So when you're making regular beer, you don't necessarily have to do that. For this, you do. It's quite easy to do. If you know a big brewery who happens to have an alkalizer or something like that, you can take it there and it'll actually do a readout for you. Otherwise, you can send it to a lab and they'll do it for you there. And you probably only need to do it once to be able to label it on the can. Now, these beers can be made in different ways. Two broad categories, really. One of them will be removing alcohol from beer that you've already produced in a standard fashion. We're not going to talk about that too much today because we are a biotechnology company and we make microorganisms and microorganisms-based solutions, and therefore it's not really our bread and butter. However, you're talking about things like reverse osmosis or distillation, probably under a vacuum if you're doing distillation. What we're going to talk about is biochemical and microbiological techniques for limiting alcohol production in the first place. And there are several ways in which you might do that. However, the big elephant in the room, the problem that we've got to solve here when we're doing this is that yeast take sugar and they ferment and they create ethanol and carbon dioxide. So how are we going to limit that ethanol production during fermentation? Because that's how we're going to limit the amount of alcohol that we produce. Now, this is what a ordinary brewer's wort looks like, right? So this is the sugar composition of that wort. On the left-hand side of the slide here, we have the sugars in the wort represented graphically. So at the top, you've got glucose, and the next one down, maltose, is 2 glucose units joined together. Then you've got maltotriose, which is 3 glucose units joined together. And then you have dextrins, which is represented in this case by 4 glucose units together, but really the sky's the limit. They go bigger and bigger and bigger, and they branch all over the place. Now, in a standard beer, the first 3 of these sugars are fermentable by the majority of the brewer's yeast that you would use. So you'll have a wort that is 75 to 90% fermentable. So this is how we're going to change the amount of alcohol we've got at the end of fermentation, is by limiting the amount of total sugars produced, but also altering the different levels of the different sugars in the wort that we produce. And this is quite a powerful technique for controlling the alcohol content of a beer. It wouldn't work, let's say, for a wine. In a wine, the majority of the sugars are glucose and fructose, and you can't really change the proportions of them. You could try and change the concentrations at the beginning by diluting the grape juice, but you can't change the composition of the juice itself. So this is something that's really only applicable to brewing. Now, a lot of the techniques that we're going to talk about, they rely on the high temperature mashing technique. And what I'd like to do here is just explain a little bit how that works. So when you're mashing, you are breaking down starches within the mash into sugars, and you're utilizing two enzymes to do that. There's beta amylase and there's alpha amylase. Now, beta amylase is responsible for the majority of the fermentable sugar in a wort. So what it does is it's an exoenzyme, and it cuts maltose units off the end of starch chain. So it's producing fermentable sugar very, very efficiently. Then you've also got alpha amylase, and what that does is it breaks up larger chains of starch into smaller ones. So together, they break down the starch into smaller bits, and then the beta amylase will break that down into even smaller fermentable bits. And they have different optimum temperatures and pHs. And if you mash at higher temperatures, what you tend to do is favor the action of alpha amylase. So you're still having starch breakdown. That alpha amylase is breaking down starches, but you're having much less of the beta amylase activity, which produces the fermentable maltose. And that's because it has a much lower optimum temperature. So if you start to go higher in temperature in the mash, those enzymes start to denature. And you can see here the green line represents the fermentability of the wort, which starts to drop as you go up into the high temperature ranges. It's especially important if you're using things like maltotriose negative yeast, which we'll talk about in future slides. Next slide. So this is the maltotriose yeast I briefly mentioned there. This is our Windsor. Now that will ferment, if we go back a few slides, I'll just show you the sugars it will ferment. It will ferment the first two sugars, so it will ferment glucose and maltose. So straight away, if you look at it, you can see that it might be doing somewhere between 60 and 75% attenuation just because it can ferment those sugars, but it won't ferment maltotriose, so it will leave some sugars behind. Now, if you pair that yeast with a low original gravity and a high mashing temperature, you can get a very low level of attenuation. And you can increase the amount of dextrins and unfermentable material in the wort. Downside of this is you do actually have to use quite high mashing temperatures. So if you're trying to use Windsor to create a low alcohol beer, you're probably talking in the 80s, 82 to 86 degrees, which can lead to processing problems. You can get quite gloopy worts that are hard to handle. We can get very, very hazy end products, and it's not very reliable. So it's quite tricky. So when we first started looking at methods for low alcohol beer production, this was the only suitable yeast we had, and this was the method that we recommended to people. These days, I probably wouldn't go for Windsor most of the time because we have alternatives available. And that alternative is Lallemand Brewing. Now, if I go back to our table again of sugars, back we go. This strain will only ferment glucose. So that's the sugar at the top there. And that makes about 10 to 15% of normal wort sugars. And actually, while we do recommend a high temperature mashing process with this strain, that actually won't alter the fermentability too much in the case of Loner, because a lot of that sugar, that glucose, actually is present in the malt before you even mash it. So the rationale there for the high temperature is actually you're limiting maltose production still, but the reason you're limiting it is not because it's going to ferment, because the yeast won't ferment it, but because it's sweet, and you don't want to have something that's sweet and unbalanced. So you're trying to limit maltose production with that high temperature mash, but not for reasons of fermentability. That being said, it's still a good way to go, because you do want to limit that sweetness in your final beer. Next slide. So this is how I would suggest using Loner. This is sort of a general instruction I give to people. So target a higher mash temperature of around 75 degrees. Limit maltose production and sweetness in your end product. Target a low original gravity, because if you go too high, you can still go over ABV just from that 15% of glucose that might exist within your wort. It's always a balancing act, right? You don't want to go too watery, so you don't want to go too weak. You don't want to go too strong and then have it go over ABV. So I would suggest somewhere in the region of 5 to 7 Plato. A lot of people will go on probably the middle to lower end of that range. Now, a lot of the time when you're brewing beers like this, you'll suffer from high pHs throughout the process. So what you want to do is alter that pH and try and keep it within a normal brewing level. So in the mash, probably somewhere like between 5.2, 5.3, thereabouts. Otherwise, it can start to rise up and you can start to leach tannins from the mash, which you don't want to do. One thing you can actually do is you can start running off, and because you've got such a low amount of mash in the mash tun, you'll find that your pH of your sparge water and the extract in your sparge water that runs off the bed will actually drop very, very quickly. So once you've recovered the majority of the extract, rather than running through the mash tun the rest of the water and leaching out lots of tannin, you can actually just cut that runoff and then top up with treated brewing liquor and then adjust your pH in the boil. Sometimes we suggest a longer boil length, and I'll talk about the reasons for that, but it's basically reducing volatiles. And you should adjust the pH as well prior to fermentation, ideally below 4.6. The reason for that is that you will stop any pathogen growth, which might infect the fermentation. So you can get pathogen growth in low alcohol beer just because it's got a lower alcohol content, and therefore some of your nasty bacteria could survive it in theory. So best practice is to drop that pH to 4.6 prior to fermentation.
Target about 4, I think, probably to be.
End pH is
finished
4, yeah.
finished fermentation. Yeah.
Finished, yeah. So you're probably going to see a drop of around 0.3 pH units during fermentation. So you're not going to get to the point you need to be at the end of fermentation. So at the end of fermentation, you also need to adjust pH as well. There's various ways in which we can do that. We can talk about it in the questions, or if we've got a slide on it later. Utilize liquid hop products, and I'll talk about that later. I've got a slide on it, and then pasteurize to ensure product stability and safety. So I don't know if anybody's heard of wurty flavors, but these are flavors that you get in low alcohol beer that can be likened to wurty, sweet, caramelly, meaty, that sort of thing. And they come from aldehydes. And these are some of the aldehydes that are most common in alcohol-free beer. So 3-MBT at the top there, 2-MBT, methionol, which it tastes like mashed potatoes. It actually smells quite nice. Hexanal on the right here, which is very green. It's kind of a green apple painty kind of flavor, a bit like acetaldehyde but nicer. And then furfural and 5-hydroxymethyl furfural are the kind of things you get with cooking meat. So they're all things that are related to heat and heat being applied to the product. There are various things you can do to limit these. One of these is to look at your malt bill. So a lot of these wurty flavors, aldehydes, they come from the malt and the malting process. So one of the things that you can do is to limit the amount of malted grain that you use in the first place by using things that would be traditionally described as adjuncts. So things like flaked rice or flaked oats, some examples of which are on the screen now. The benefit of oats, wheat as well, you can provide protein and mouthfeel as well with those, but it will just reduce the amount of wurty aldehydes that are there in the first place, and therefore you'll get less of wurty characteristic. I do find a simplistic malt beer is the best way to go. If you start putting loads and loads of specialty malts in there, it can just start to taste quite wurty. So don't put any crystalline, don't put any amber malt in, that sort of thing. I just don't think it really helps that much. They can work in a stout because they'll obviously lower the pH. So it can work in a stout, but if you're doing a lighter beer and you don't want to do that to lower the pH, you can actually use some acid malt as well. So you could use
also probably steer clear of using a base malt like Maris Otter or any of the kind of crystally kind of caramelly.
Yeah, I have seen in the past people go for things like Vienna malt or Munich malt because it's got more flavour to it. You don't want that. Don't, because you want less.
Start basic. Yeah. Very, it's very boring, but
it is dull, but
be creative.
A nice, clean profile. That's what we want.
Yeah.
And hopping wise, I mean, hops are something we speak about a lot, but in the case of low alcohol beer, you really have to think about the dry hopping process. Ideally, you can keep them hot side, and then you don't have to worry about it. But if you come them in the cold side, the danger is that you can get hop creep. So you can have simple sugars like glucose being released from larger chain dextrins that exist within the wort by very fresh hops. And it's actually, it's a consequence of our hop quality being very high that actually they have some enzyme action in them. And how can we reduce this? Either go hot side with your regular T90 hops, or if you're going to dry hop on the cold side, use some downstream hop products. So there's some examples of potential products that you could use on the screen here. So things like CGX or Bathhouse Spectrum. Other oils and things are available as well. But basically, just don't put T90s in your low alcohol product post fermentation. I'm not sure if I have a slide on it later. I may well do, but the fermentations that you have with these strains are actually very short. It's going to take probably in the region of 48 to 72 hours maximum. And at that point, you want to chill it. So you do want to be, even if you're dry hopping with downstream extracts, you want to be doing it cold. I have had people who have let the fermentation stay warm for like 5 or 6 days. It's a very bad idea because in a brewing environment, like it or not, you're going to have trace brewing yeast flying around. And if they are in a low alcohol beer or wort that has some maltose or maltotriose present, they're going to take off. They're going to start fermenting, and you're going to have a beer that's over ABV and can't be a low alcohol beer anymore.
There's also no need to do diacetyl rests or any kind of like temperature fluctuations. Yeah, like 2 days, hitting terminal gravity, chilling it down.
Yeah, and the rationale for that is that because you have such a limited fermentation, those chemicals aren't produced above their flavor threshold anyway. So there's no real upside to leaving it longer. All you're doing really is increasing the risk of that beer becoming contaminated and having to be thrown away. pH. So we briefly spoke about pH. At what stage did you correct the pH? So we've already discussed that you need to correct it really at all stages of the process. So that's at your mash, at your boil, pre-fermentation and post-fermentation. One thing we didn't mention yet is which acid that you might use for that. And that's really a question of preference. So a lot of breweries out there will reach straight for the lactic acid because they have it on the floor over there. However, lactic acid is a weak acid, and at larger concentrations, it does have quite a unpleasant flavor. It can be quite sicky. So I would probably recommend playing around with your acids. There are various acids in which you could choose. On the weak side, you've got phosphoric, you've got lactic, and you've got malic, all of which could be used. Malic is the fruit sugar that you'd find in apples. On the strong acid sides, hydrochloric and sulfuric, and you'd need very, very little of that to adjust the pH correctly. It probably wouldn't have any flavor impact. You'd need so little of it. So you can play around with that. And one thing I would probably recommend that you do is take your base beer or water and mix the acids in to get to the right pH, and just taste them and see which one you prefer. But I'd probably
citric acid.
Didn't mention citric. Yeah, citric's a good one as well. Don't use nitric. But yeah, just play around and see what you like the taste of. Don't necessarily just reach for the lactic acid straight away. Other considerations that you may have. So these beers, as I mentioned, there's always a bit of a balance between too watery, too sweet, not enough body. Are there things that you can add? And we have one particular product that we recommend for beers like this, and that's called ISY Enhance, or Easy Enhance if you happen to be French. And that is a product that we've brought over from our wine division. And what it is manoproteins from yeast cell walls. And they will bind sugars, and they will bind polyphenols, and they'll give you a coating in the mouth. So it's got quite a low dose rate. I think it's 20 grams per hectolitre, which goes into
20 to 60 grams per hectolitre, depending on what kind of style you're doing. I'd say for low alcohol, probably 30 to 60 grams per hectolitre is a good way to go. If you're maybe doing like a low alcohol lager, maybe 20 grams per hectolitre is more appropriate. I know people are using it at that rate as well.
And when you open this, you will notice it's got quite a distinct yeasty character to it. So that's why we tend to recommend to people put it in the hot side, because a lot of that aroma will get flashed off during the whirlpool and the fermentation stages. Other considerations that you may have. So these beers, because there's so little extract in them, there's so little protein from the malt, they tend to have fairly poor head retention. So you can take steps to improve that head retention. There's various products that you can use. So propylene glycol alginate has been used in beer for decades. We have two versions of it. One is a dried version, one is a liquid version. The liquid version, I think it's only available in the UK. The dried version, you can mix up with a blender, but you do need to filter it because it can get quite lumpy. So you need to blend it up and then put it through a sieve to be able to use it in the beer. It also requires labeling. So it's E405, and you should put that on the label. Other options you could use are tetrahop or hexahop, both of which are modified hop extracts, where they take the alpha acid from the hops and they chemically modify it slightly, and it produces very, very stable foam. So that's a way to go, and we've got an example product on the page as well. Right, the tricky question: do I need to stabilize my low alcohol beer? And the answer is yes, you do. On the left-hand side of the slide, you've got this graphic which came from a scientific paper, but it's got all the barriers that microorganisms have to get through in order to contaminate a beer. So you've got the boil, you've got hops, you've got the pH, you've got ethanol, you've got CO2 at the end there. Many of these things are reduced or absent to a degree in low alcohol beer, which makes them more susceptible to contamination with beer spoilers and potentially with pathogens of humans as well. So you do need to stabilize it, albeit there is some interesting recent research that shows the beer is less susceptible than we had maybe originally thought. So Greg from Camden BRI has got some really interesting research on that. and a lot of that, the thing that it kind of swings on is actually the CO2 content. So the CO2 content seems to make quite a big difference to how susceptible a beer is to contamination. However, we would still recommend that you stabilize, and there are various ways in which you might do that. The gold standard is tunnel pasteurization. That's where you pass the finished packages through a tunnel and they're sprayed with hot water, and it gets up to a certain temperature for a certain amount of time, and from that you can work out the PUs. For a low alcohol beer, we tend to recommend 40 to 60 PUs, although it does depend on the cell concentration and the level of contamination that may or may not be present. So really, your PU would be calculated on the log reduction contamination that you wanted to achieve, but let's assume that it's not contaminated in the first place and it's not a reduction that you're really trying to achieve. 40 to 60 is about right. Flash pasteurization you can do as well. That looks more like a heat exchanger than a tunnel with spraying water through it. However, unless you have a sterile fill line, you still have the potential of contamination at the filling step. Same with sterile filtration, so you still have the possibility of contamination at the filling step. There's also a sterile filter is not necessarily infallible. You can get organisms going through it, and for that reason, I actually know some people that like to use 2 sterile filters of the same, of sort of different brands in series. So if it isn't caught by the first, then it would be caught by the second. I've got an interesting line at the bottom here, which is something I just found out about, which is a product called Shredder, which uses immobilized structures, which are very small, to actually like rip apart cells. So it looks like a filter module, but you pass it through the filter module and it destroys organisms as it goes through. Now, this isn't something that I can necessarily recommend because it's very, very new. I've just heard about it in the last few weeks, but I thought it'd be interesting to stick it down because it might be something that we see becoming more popular if it's proven to work well. I should imagine, given the very small gaps you're trying to force things through, you probably need quite a high pressure pump to make it work. So are there other options, so chemical options? And the answer is not very good ones. So if you follow the address at the bottom of this slide, that will take you to the relevant European legislation for stabilizers in alcohol-free beer. And I've tried to put in here some of the caveats. So there's sorbate and benzoate, which are only allowed in very specific circumstances. So in the case of benzoate, only alcohol-free beer in kegs containing more than 0.5% added fermentable sugar. So really that's designed for things like Radlers, which are quite popular in Germany. Same with the sorbic acid, actually not alcohol-free beer, just beer containing more than 0.5% added fermentable sugar. Sulfite you could use, but it's usually present beyond the legal limit at the end of fermentation, or close to the legal limit at the end of fermentation anyway. So if you were to add additional sulfite, you'd probably end up not being within the legal recommendation. Lysozyme is something that's used in wine, but I've never actually really seen it used in beer. And then for final and probably the most interesting from our perspective is glycolipids. So these are chemicals that are derived from mushrooms, and some have been licensed for use within the EU. Nagado being the first, I think. I don't think Kyber is quite approved yet. These are actually still in the consultation phase in the UK market. We have been bashing them around within government for several years now and not come to a conclusion. So we can't yet use Nagado in the UK market, but we can in Europe. I don't think it'll be long, but watch this space. It may yet become allowed. Draft challenges. Everything we've just mentioned about these beers is that they are quite susceptible to contamination, and that's certainly the case in the case of draft beer, where the contamination from the line is the main concern, because there are many pubs out there that do a great job of cleaning their beer lines, and there are others which don't so much. So are there solutions? Yes. Go to accounts that you know well and you know that they clean, educate barge staff, audit the lines, audit the pubs. And then there are some other options out there, which are on the screen. So you've got here the bar blade system from Heineken, which is proprietary, so we can't use that. But what that essentially is a single trip keg inside a bubble with a very short run to the tap. So it's direct draw. And we can, as brewers without access to that proprietary technology, come up with other ways. So one thing that I would probably recommend using is an under-counter key keg with a very short line. And there are other options for lines which are removable as well. So on the right-hand side of the slide here is a picture of the flexi draft system that comes from Micromatic, where you can actually replace the entire line in the tap all the way down to the keg. So there are solutions out there, but I would probably suggest key keg, fast turnover, nice new line, or short draw that can be very easily cleaned. So those are the kind of things that I would suggest for draft. Just be careful. So that's a very short overview to low alcohol beer production. Hopefully I didn't go too fast. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't.
No, I think we're all right.
If we're right on half an hour, so that's all right. So we'll move it round to questions now. So Alex is going to take the question.
Well, there's only one question currently in the chat, which is I'm not quite sure if they mean pH or temperature. In EU Brewing books, the optimal mash temperature is 5.5 to 5.6. I'm assuming they mean pH.
Yes, I would have thought so.
And then for optimal, between the optimal 5.4 to 5.6 for beta amylase and 5.6 to 5.8 for alpha amylase, why is there a difference? And if we go for alpha amylase action at higher temperatures or higher pH, is there a benefit to going to the higher range? I think we can probably talk about the saccharification of sugars at higher temperatures as well.
But if you go really high, and this is something we actually have looked into,
if you go on the slide, it's on the Windsor slide, Andy.
Yeah, okay. I can go all the way back. 2 seconds.
If anyone has any other questions, just pop them in the chat or in the question box.
So if you go very hot, you get hydrolysis of starch at the high temperature. So there is actually a downside to going really high. It's also very, very gloopy, so you get a lot of like protein coagulation and things that just mean it doesn't work very well. With regard to the pH, yes, there are different quoted figures for optimum pHs and even temperatures across different literatures. Between brewing texts from Europe and between brewing texts in the UK, it's probably to do with the malt that they were testing at the time. So there's probably a bit of a range, and different brewing processes and stuff as well. So there is a difference between these texts. I've seen it before as well.
I think it's one slide back.
One slide more.
There you go. The maltose production drops down as you go up in temperature and hit about 85 degrees, which is obviously what you're trying to limit for fermenting with Windsor. But then it starts weirdly going back up again. And that's because the starch will just break down because of the high temperatures. So there is such a thing as too high mashing.
When I first did this work, we actually used starch tests, and it became quite apparent as you got hotter and hotter and hotter above 82, you started to actually get less breakdown of starch, not more, but you got more fermentable sugar. So you're releasing some fermentable sugar from that starch, but not breaking down the starch particularly at all. So it's hydrolyzed by temperature, not by enzymatic action.
Okay. Next question from Jeremy. Any tips on improving wort/beer clarity of high temperature mashes? I've also noted down what kind of things are we talking for fining agents and hazy or not low alcohol beers?
If you're going very high, it's quite tricky because you're going to have a lot of crap in there. If you're using Lona and it's like 72 degrees, it's actually a bit easier. I would probably go with like a standard filing option like Protosol, and I would look at using some Compact in the kettle as well. But I'd probably try and scale my Compact edition to OG. So if your regular Compact CG edition for, let's say, a 1050 wort is 200, this is not a recommendation. This is just me spitballing. If you're going half that OG, maybe half it in the first instance as a rough estimate, and then you could do an optimization afterwards after you've done that particular beer to see what it should actually be. So I would do that. One thing you do have to bear in mind is that low alcohol beer strains tend to be quite bad at flocculating anyway, and that's because the presence of fermentable sugars can inhibit flocculation to a degree. So all of these yeasts, not just Lona, that are marketed for low alcohol beer production tend to be quite bad at flocculating.
Okay, cool. Next question would be, what FG would you expect to be hitting on a starting gravity of 1025? So if you're using Lona, Lona has a attenuation of about 15%, 15 to 20%, depending on the mash temp. So you probably end up with a finishing gravity of about 23. So you'd still get the 0.5% ABV. A lot of the recipes that have worked really well kind of start at about 21, 22 and finish in the mid-teens. I'd say that's probably a good starting point to start from, unless you want something that's a bit sweeter or fuller bodied. Andy?
Yeah, I'd probably estimate on like going with about 15% attenuation. I'd probably suggest on that basis, and then seeing where it would finish on that basis.
Yeah. Okay. Digby's asked a question. What's the most common mistakes you see on first-time low alcohol brews?
Oh, it's either
too complicated mash bill, too complicated malt bill.
Yeah, it's probably that. I was going to say it's either that or not chilling it in time, but it's probably the malt bill. It's probably the
Everyone wants to make their beer unique and special, and that's how you do it in alcoholic beer. And unfortunately, it doesn't work quite the same in low alcohol beer. Someone said they read an article about using rice to reduce wörty flavors. Is there much truth to that in your experience?
Yes, absolutely. I think we had a slide on that. Let me come forward. I think one of the options was rice, wasn't it? Yes, deluxe flaked rice. There we go. So yes, that can help because it has a lower concentration of aldehydes within that particular cereal. So you get less because it's not being malted. So yes, there is something to that. I would probably look at maybe 10 to 15% rice, something like that.
Okay. Sean from Siren. Hi, Sean. For darker grains, crystals to roasted, is the sugar breakdown the same as you showed earlier? How do you predict the fermentability of stout grist using Loner with the breakdown of glucose, maltose, maltotriose, dextrins?
No, it would not be the same because you don't get the same sort of breakdown of the extract within darker malts as you would with a pale malt. So I'd probably suggest the best way of doing it, the most accurate way of doing it is empirically rather than trying to calculate it. But you will have a lower attenuation with a certain amount of dark malts than you would with a pale malt. So hard to calculate. And I don't think we've got any data on the level of attenuation that you might get with different levels of dark malt in the grist. Maybe that's something we could look at doing in the future.
I know that there are some people who are using a darker malt just as kind of a wash through, like as they're doing the sparge rather than in the actual mash, just to try and reduce that like astringency that sometimes it can give. So that might be something worth trying out as well. And then you obviously get not a huge amount of sugar from it. You just get the flavor and the color. What else have we got? Is there a different recommended usage of products like oats or rice in these beers compared to normal alcoholic beers? I'd probably say it's similar percentages to like a neat.
Yeah, is that with regards to like the percentage that you might use in the product?
I guess so.
Depends what you're trying to achieve as well. I mean, one of the downsides of oats within both alcoholic and low alcohol beers is it's actually got quite a high lipid content. So it can be quite bad for head retention. So better for aldehydes, worse for head retention. But if you're going to fix that at a later stage anyway, then it doesn't really matter too much. It also can be quite high protein, so it can give you a haze like oats and wheat can. But it depends, again, if you're trying to go with a hazy beer or a bright beer. So I think it's very much dependent on what you're trying to achieve.
I'm just going to keep going through the questions, so we'll answer as many as we can. We've got two more, unless some more people think of anything. Can higher temperatures help with reducing wörty flavors from specialty malts?
High temperatures in the boil? Or...
Yeah, I guess they're talking about mashing temperature, but yeah, a longer boil. Aldehydes tend to develop with heat, so
yeah, you actually form more in the mash. Yeah. You might boil off some more. There's a good paper somewhere which shows the levels of aldehydes through different stages of the brewing process, and you actually create quite a lot during mashing. So no, it probably wouldn't. It'd probably make it worse.
Have we heard of brewers using things such as spices to replicate the perception of alcohol in alcohol-free beer? Yes. Some of the guys use chili or chili jams or chili extracts to recreate the heat of alcohol. I want to say the Verdant one is also, the Psych has some chili in it. I think the Blunt Rock guys, when they first did, had chili. They made like a chili jam and used that. So yeah, but it does.
There's a well-known alcohol-free stout brand that uses sucrose as a flavor enhancer to add a bit of something that's a bit more like an alcohol. Because alcohol has like a sweetness to it, so they use that as in place of alcohol. So I mean, there's lots of things you can play around with it. Again, it's almost like making a soft drink, so you can play around to your heart's content.
I think the key, though, and what hopefully you'll take away from this presentation, or if you message us, is definitely more the fact that once you've got a good base beer, that's like the starting point, and then from there you can kind of tweak the recipe a bit more, add different things.
Absolutely.
Jethro's back.
Hey, Jethro.
Oh, he's still
He's
on
muted.
mute.
He's muted. Oh no.
No, you got me. I like the fact that you pulled me up with you being like, okay, I'm done now. Like you can come in. Thanks for that. That was really cool. I really enjoyed listening to it. Like you're always a pleasure. Yeah, thanks to Andy and Alex and Andy, a great double act as ever. I really enjoy your company and your brains in this format and while drinking a pint. Yeah.
It must like pour out my ears, my brains at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, great info. If you guys, anyone listening, have got any more questions, their emails were there earlier and it's on the website, and you guys probably have contact details for me or anyone at Loughran, but again, it's on our website. And on our website, we also have we've got a little kind of page of resources that's got, I think we've got a blog post from the guys at Lallemand. We're going to post this as well. So if you've got any staff maybe that couldn't join and you want to have a rewatch, that's kind of useful as well. It's got links to kind of all the products as well. If you want to look for liner, etc., and anything you might want to use. And yeah, we're about, if you ever want to chat, and we can come down to the brewery, any of us on the call, and just help out and whatnot. In general, thanks for coming. Thanks for a really sweet year and a nice time. And yeah, good luck if you're going to go and make some and sell some in 2026. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jethro.
I worked really hard on this. And then, yeah, I'm obviously the show.
Perfect. Just reach out if you need anything at all. Thanks so much, guys. Cheers.
Cheerio.
Ciao.